This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to make some updates and some upgrades to our Eligeth, Crossroads Augur, and Sakashima of Thousand Faces Mono Blue Partner EDH deck. Thank you for joining us for this installment of the Up and Up series. Who out there in the MTG Burgeoning community remembers this deck? This pair of commanders, Eligeth and Sakashima, were the winners of MTG Burgeoning's Tournament of Partners. This was a series that took place many moons ago that took the 32 most played partners at the time, as per EDHREC.com, and randomly assigned them into two partner pairs. There were 16 two-partner pairs, and then they entered into a single bracketed elimination tournament that was chosen by members of the MTG Burgeoning community. When all was said and done, Eligeth and Sakashima were the winning pair of partner commanders around which we as a community sculpted the 98 of this EDH deck. Well, here we are with the very first installment of the Up and Up series for Eligeth and Sakashima. Although we cannot change the partner pairs, that was part of the deal for winning the Tournament of Partners. We can and will continue to do so, reshape, refine, update, and upgrade the 98 of this deck. Of course, you can see all of this in the description below, and as we get forward with this installment of the Up and Up series, we've got some changes to make. So what we tried to do when we first constructed the 98 of this deck is we wanted to kind of make it a half Eligeth deck and a half Sakashima deck. We had a Sphinx tribal sub-theme to go with Eligeth and a Sakashima clone theme, so that we had some biggins that we can send into combat as ways of having additional win conditions. Throughout both of those themes, those two themes, including the rest of the deck, also revolved around a scrying theme, because Eligeth's ability to let us draw cards instead of scrying them is a very powerful ability that if we can fine-tune, we can definitely make that into a winning formula for this mono blue build. So, that's going to be the goal and the endeavor of this partner deck. We're going to strip away some of these sub-themes, and we're going to be a little more optimized with what we want to do, secondary to the card drawing and the scrying that Eligeth helps us to benefit from, which we can benefit from with Eligeth. So, with that in mind, we are going to have a large subset of some of the meanest cards. They're counter spells. And you know, MTG Burgeoning's stance on counter spells is, well, we have a general disdain for counter magic in our play group. Well, it's a mono blue deck, and we tried to go a different route with it, and let's just say the results were unfavorable each and every time. So if we're going to sit down with a mono blue deck, we might as well decide to make it as mono bluish as possible. So with that in mind, we're going to strip away the segment of the Sphinx tribal part of this build, and we're going to replace it with counter spells. So let's see the counter spells that are going to go in first. We decided to choose a selection of very economically costed counter spells, because the forward-thinking vision for the end game of this deck, because this is not going to be the first appearance on the Up and Up series for this build, is we are going to eventually sculpt a combo build out of this mono blue deck, and the counter spells that we chose to put into this deck, they're going to help to protect our combo as we get closer and closer to assembling the pieces, as well as when we're going off on our game-winning turn. So with that in mind, many of these counter spells can be cast without even paying mana to do so. So, let's see the counter spells. We're going to begin with a Pact of Negation. Now, this is a little bit of a cheat because, no, we don't have to spend any mana to cast the spell, but if we have another turn thereafter, as in at the beginning of our next upkeep, if we don't pay 3 and 2 blue, then we end up losing the game. So, Pact of Negation is definitely going to be one of those cards that we're going to choose to protect our game-winning combo at the time that it's going off. and hopefully not anytime sooner, because 5 mana for a counterspell is way too much. We want nothing to do with paying that at the beginning of our next upkeep. Next, we have a copy of Fierce Guardianship. This will cost 0 if we control one of our commanders at the time that we choose to cast this spell. And more often than not, if we're going off on our combo, Eligeth is going to be on our side of the battlefield, or Sakashima will be there too, most likely as a copy of Eligeth, which we'll pause right here just for the purposes of clarity. If Sakashima is a copy of Eligeth, we don't get to draw double the cards. It's still just a scry into drawn card effect times 1. We don't get to double up. The only thing we get to do is preserve our scry ability, because then our opponents have to worry about 2 commanders doing it as opposed to just 1. So with Fierce Guardianship here, we can cast it for free and counter target non-creature spell, which more often than not is going to be one directed at one of our commanders. Next up, we have Force of Will. Yes, we could pay 3 and 2 blue mana to cast this, but it would be a lot easier to pay 1 life and exile a blue card from our hand to counter target spell. We should have plenty of blue cards in our hand, and we should have more than 1 life, which makes Force of Will one of the most powerful counterspells in this deck, and in all of Magic, of course, and you don't need to hear me tell you that. You probably knew that already. Next up, we have Foil. We could pay 2 and 2 blue, or we can discard an island card and another card rather than paying this spell's mana value, and then we can just simply counter target spell. In a deck that's dedicated to drawing as many cards as possible constantly, we should have plenty of selections to discard in order to cast Foil for free. The same could be said with Disrupting Shoal. We could pay X and 2 blue mana, or we can just simply exile a blue card with converted mana cost X from our hand, rather than paying the spell's mana cost. And if we do, we simply counter target spell if its converted mana cost was X. We should have tons of cards in our hand, and we should have a mana value that matches the spell that we want to counter. Next is Thwart. We could pay 2 and 2 blue mana, but we also could just simply return 3 islands we control to our hand instead of paying Thwart's mana cost. And again, if we do so, then we counter target spell. Next up, we're going to need a little bit of assistance from our opponents to make sure that we can cast this for free, and that will be Mindbreak Trap. We could pay 2 and 2 blue mana, or if an opponent casts 3 or more spells this turn, we could just pay 0 rather than paying its mana cost, and we exile any number of target spells. This is important to remember because this does not counter a spell, it exiles spells, so if we have any spells that say this spell cannot be countered, that's fine, we'll just exile it instead. And the last 2 counterspells are going in. There's no way to dance around this. We have to pay 1 blue mana for each of them, but they're each going to be very effective in what they do. Swan Song is going to counter an enchantment, an instant, or a sorcery spell. It's those instant and sorcery spells, most likely the instants if it's during our turn, of course, that we're trying to make sure that we can control so that our opponents can't disrupt what we're doing, secondary to our game-ending combo. And then the controller of that spell can create a 2/2 bird with flying, which we're not going to care about because we're going to win the game anyways. And the last counterspell going in for 1 blue mana is going to be an Offer You Can't Refuse. Here we counter target non-creature spell, so that can be any spell as long as it's not a creature. It's not the greatest, most optimal thing to provide our opponent with 2 treasure tokens, but we've got other answers for that mana too, so if they so choose to use those treasure tokens to cast spells to interact with our game-ending combo or with our commanders, we will be prepared to address that. So those are the 9 counter spells that are going into this build. And now very quickly, the 9 Sphinxes that are coming out. Horizon Scholar was coming out. It was just a flying creature that when it came into play, it's scryed 2. Its absence is not going to be felt. The same can be said with Cloud Reader Sphinx. It did the exact same thing. It's a flyer. It comes in, it scries 2, it's gone. Sphinx of Foresight, it's slow. All these Sphinxes are going to fly, of course. They're going to have decent powers and toughnesses. This, just too slow. At the beginning of our upkeep, we scry 1. That's just not going to get it done for what we're trying to do right now. Scholar of the Lost Trove. When it comes into play, we would cast target instant, sorcery, or artifact from our graveyard for free. I mean, we're paying 7 mana to do that. I don't think we're really going to worry about it. Plus, it doesn't have flash, and it did not do anything to help our scry theme, so that one's easy to come out. Wind Reader Sphinx let us draw a card whenever a creature with flying attack, which definitely benefited us because we had flyers. But by the time this deck goes through all of its installments of the Up and Up series, we'll have so many other peripheral draw sources that we won't miss this card. And it's inflated mana value. Yeah, that's 5 and 2 blue. We're not playing green here. This is mono blue. Dream Eater, this did nothing to help us with our scry effect. It has Surveil 4, which is like the graveyard version of scrying, and it does bounce a non-land permanent when it comes into play that an opponent controls, but it's no longer really a part of what we're trying to do with this deck, so that's coming out as well. Sphinx of the Second Sun did not help us with our scry effects outside of giving us an additional beginning phase, which if we had any permanents in play that let us scry 1 at the beginning of our upkeep, that would have been helpful, but huge mana cost, too slow. We don't get enough out of the beginning phases anyways, so that one was out. A Tempsis was tough to take out because it could be a win condition in a build like this, because whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, we reveal our hand, and if we have cards with at least 6 different CMCs, then that player loses the game. If it were reversed and we ended up winning the game, then I think we have to keep this card in here regardless of anything else. But as we're going to demonstrate throughout the rest of this series and this deck and its appearances on the Up and Up series, having 6 cards with mana values of 6 different mana values, even if we go from 0 to 6, after we're done here, that may actually be an impossibility. Okay, so that's why it just makes more sense to take a Tempsis out, and it's inflated 3 and 3 blue mana cost, and that's coming out. And Unish, I love Unish. Unish is probably the best Sphinx commander we have right now, but if we're stripping away the Sphinx tribal part of this deck, taking out the actual Sphinx general just makes sense because we can't take any advantage of its enter the battlefield trigger because we no longer have a high number of Sphinxes in the deck to actually benefit from it. All right, here you go, MTG BC, Phase 1 complete. 1 Up and Up series installment for Eligeth and Sakashima. Let me know your thoughts about these changes in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.